Welcome back to the deep dive. If navigating the tech landscape of 2025 felt, I don't know, like sprinting through a dense fog,
Yeah.
you are absolutely not alone.
Yeah, not at all.
This was supposed to be the year, right? The moment AI moved from just a proof of concept to, the bedrock of every single business.
And in some ways it did. I mean, that rapid acceleration definitely happened.
Oh, for sure. We saw these monumental, sometimes very quiet breakthroughs in science, in specialized models, and just in compute capacity that would have been, well, unimaginable maybe 5 years ago.
But that's only half the story, isn't it? The narrative of 2025 wasn't just about triumphs. It was defined just as much by these massive, very public, and incredibly expensive failures.
That's a great point. The successes were often so technical and subtle, tucked away in research papers or labs.
Exactly. Things like better model efficiency or a breakthrough in molecular synthesis. The failures, on the other hand, they were spectacular. They were system-wide, and they were often broadcast globally, sometimes literally shutting down huge parts of the internet.
And that structural contrast, that's what makes this year so critical for you, the learner. Our mission today is to go beyond those dramatic headlines and really deep dive into our source material.
Which is primarily the Future Today Strategy Group's 2025 Tech Trends Report, the AI Agent Report, and a bunch of other industry roundups.
And we're looking for those fundamental structural lessons. Why did certain things, like open source AI and bioengineering, succeed exponentially, while these heavily hyped products and absolute critical infrastructure just failed spectacularly?
It's the ultimate study in contrast. It really shows us that innovation velocity, the speed at which you can create a brilliant new model, it means precisely nothing if the underlying foundation can't handle the strain.
And that foundation is everything, right? It's not just one thing.
No, it's everything from the physical stuff like power grids and data centers to the architectural components like data integration layers, and so critically, the ethical guardrails. We really have to distinguish between true technical maturity and just simple integration capacity.
It's like you said before we started, the fastest car in the world is useless if the road it's on is prone to collapse.
Exact.
That sets the stage perfectly. Okay, let's unpack this and start with the core engine of the year, artificial intelligence. So when we look at the raw capabilities of AI models in 2025, the pace was it was breathtaking.
Absolutely.
I mean, Google DeepMind's Gemini Ultra, it definitely raised the bar significantly past what we saw even with GPT-4. It set new benchmarks for multimodal performance, and it was tackling professional tasks with a level of accuracy we just hadn't seen before.
And that proprietary race, the race for the biggest, most capable model, that's certainly important. It pushes the edge of research. But the truly disruptive event of 2025, the thing that really caused a tectonic shift, was Meta's open source release of Llama 2.
Okay, let's talk about that, because that wasn't just a footnote in the year, was it?
Oh, not at all. It fundamentally altered the entire market dynamic. It just accelerated this democratization of intelligence in a way nothing else could have.
And here's where it gets really interesting, especially if you're in the developer community. By releasing a foundational model of that caliber under a permissive license, Llama 2 basically set off an open source revolution.
It did. And suddenly, you had developers and smaller firms all over the world who could take this high-performance model and fine-tune it. They could create these rival variants that could, for very specific enterprise applications, compete with or even just outright surpass the big, expensive, closed models.
It just drastically lowered the barrier to entry.
For the first time, you didn't need a multi-million-dollar budget for inference. Cost-sensitive users could leverage these free or, very low-cost open-source solutions. And the success of that whole ecosystem, it forced a major philosophical reckoning among the giants.
I mean, we saw Sam Altman from OpenAI admit quite publicly that the company might have been on the wrong side of history about closed systems.
And that statement right there, that is a direct reflection of how powerful the open ecosystem became this year. It just proliferated access to high-performance AI, and frankly, it created a huge pricing split in the market.
It's basically an admission that hoarding intellectual property might actually slow down innovation for everyone, right?
Right.
And that ultimately helps the centralized players less than a vibrant, decentralized ecosystem.
Exactly. But beyond just accessibility, there was a major technical shift away from just brute force computing.
Right. For years, progress was all about the pre-training scaling law.
The idea that more data, more parameters, more compute, more FLOPS just automatically meant better performance.
But that started to hit a wall in 2025.
A very real, very expensive wall. Building ever larger models became prohibitively costly and demanded just unsustainable amounts of energy. So the focus shifted, and it shifted dramatically. Researchers are now prioritizing efficiency and new architectural techniques over just raw size.
And the clearest example of that is the rise of chain-of-thought models, or CoT. So for our listeners who might not be deep in AI engineering, can you break that down? How does chain-of-thought fundamentally differ from a traditional large language model?
Okay, so think of a traditional LLM as a brilliant, incredibly fast guesser. It predicts the most statistically likely next word or token based on all the data it's been trained on.
Okay.
CoT is different. It's a technique that forces the model to generate a series of explicit intermediate reasoning steps before it gives you the final answer. It's like forcing a student to show their work in a math problem.
So it's not just about the prediction anymore. It's about a traceable, verifiable reasoning process.
Exactly. And this emphasis on deeper, real-time reasoning means you can get higher accuracy on complex tasks without just maxing out the parameter count. It lets smaller, more efficient models punch way, way above their weight.
And this shift away from pure scale toward more efficient architecture, you're saying that's the big sign that the field is maturing.
It's the most important technical sign. It's moving beyond its infancy.
And we saw that sophistication in some specific breakthroughs, like DeepMind's alpha geometry. Generative AI has always struggled with pure math, right? Especially geometry.
Right, because it requires true logical deduction, not just pattern matching.
And alpha geometry was this huge moment because it solved 25 out of 30 Olympiad-level geometric proofs.
And its success came from combining the best of both worlds. It used neural networks, which are great at recognizing patterns and heuristics, with these traditional logical deduction engines, what we call symbolic AI. It wasn't just guessing, it was building a verifiable step-by-step argument.
Which tells us that the most powerful AI systems of the future are probably going to be neurosymbolic.
A merger of statistical pattern recognition and logical rigor.
Absolutely. Okay, so on the model development side, 2025 was a massive triumph. Speed, accessibility, sophistication. The AI brain is brilliant. But let's talk about the body. Because when we tried to integrate these brilliant models into real businesses, the sources are unanimous. The #1 reason AI pilots failed across the board was integration.
That is the critical structural lesson of the year. The bottleneck wasn't the brain. It wasn't about which model you chose. It was the nervous system.
The nervous system, I like that.
As one source, the Composio report, put it, engineers and leaders were obsessing over which LLM kernel to use while completely ignoring the operating system you need to run that kernel properly inside a real enterprise architecture.
So what does that operating system actually entail? Why is integration such a uniquely difficult problem for AI agents?
It all comes down to actionability and data reliability. An advanced model is totally useless if it can't reliably get good contextual data from legacy systems, or if it can't get the right permissions, or if it can't execute an action without failing.
So the failed pilots were treating these agents like drop-in replacements for a human task.
Exactly. They didn't see that an autonomous agent is a totally new architectural component. It needs its own dedicated management layer.
So it's not enough to just tell the AI, hey, go book me a flight.
Yeah.
You need this robust system that can handle all the complex, multi-step actions involved.
Yes, logging into the booking system, checking your calendar for conflicts, handling a credit card failure, updating the calendar when it's done, all of it.
Which is what the Composio report was talking about with this agent native OS layer.
Exactly. It's a dedicated platform designed to handle the complexity of coordinating all those steps and tools to make sure the agent doesn't get lost between actions. And crucially, this layer needs to be event-driven.
Okay, let's pause on that because that technical distinction is vital. For our listeners, what is the practical difference between an event-driven architecture, which uses webhooks, and the older method, polling?
So when a system polls, it's constantly asking, has anything changed? Has anything changed? Has anything changed yet?
It sounds exhausting.
It is. Think of it like calling your friend every 5 minutes to see if they've arrived at the party yet. It's slow, it's inefficient, and it eats up a ton of resources. An event-driven architecture, on the other hand, it relies on webhooks. A webhook is just an instantaneous, automated message that gets sent only when a specific event happens, like deal closed or inventory low.
So instead of constantly checking the CRM to see if a deal closed, The CRM just instantly sends the AI agent an alert the moment it
which
happens.
ensures real-time reliability, and that's essential for anything autonomous. If your agent is operating on slow or outdated data, the whole chain just collapses.
And this brings us to that broader strategic failure you mentioned, the cost of autonomy for autonomy's sake.
Yes.
That sounds less like a tech problem and more like a philosophical one.
It is. We saw so many autonomous innovations pop up, not from genuine productivity needs, but from these, artificial constraints, like trying to restrict labor mobility in certain industries.
So you had companies deploying capital to build less efficient automated systems just to replace humans.
Instead of creating genuinely new value. For example, you might automate a highly specific, low variability task, and yeah, you save on labor costs. But if that robot needs far more specialized maintenance and breaks down all the time, the total cost of ownership ends up being way higher than the human wage it replaced.
So the lesson for leaders, then, is that the real challenge isn't finding something to automate.
No, it's finding where the agent can truly add exponential value, something a human just couldn't do alone. If you're only automating for the sake of automation, you often end up with a high-cost, fragile system that gives you very limited incremental gain. The strategy has to be guided by value creation, not just replacement.
Speaking of fragility, let's pivot from the digital to the physical world.
Mm-hmm.
Because if AI was the brilliant brain of 2025, our underlying infrastructure was definitely the leaky foundation.
That's putting it mildly.
I mean, the single biggest technology flop of the entire year, according to multiple industry roundups, it wasn't a product, it wasn't a failed startup, it was the massive, catastrophic, system-wide cloud outages.
That's the textbook definition of systemic risk. We discovered, very painfully, that when power is so concentrated in a few key cloud provider, the failure of even a single core service can just ripple outward and crash huge portions of the online world.
Let's get into the mechanics of the AWS failure specifically. What happened there?
The AWS outage was tied to the failure of a key internal service in one of their most crucial regions. And this didn't just take down customer websites, it took out huge internal AWS resources. It actually forced Amazon to halt its own AI project.
Right, I remember this. There was that notable consequence with their AI recap service, the one that made video summaries for Prime Video content.
And when the service went down, it started publishing incorrect information. It was telling people the hit show Fallout was set in the 1950s.
Which is a very meta moment, isn't it?
Mhm.
An infrastructure failure causes an AI service to misinform the public about a show, about a societal collapse.
The collateral damage was just immense. But the Cloudflare failure, that was almost more alarming in its sheer destructive irony.
That outage was huge. What was the core cause there?
It was traced back to a seemingly tiny, innocuous database permission change inside Cloudflare's core infrastructure.
One little change.
One change. But because the internet's traffic routing is so hyper-centralized, that single internal error caused these cascading waves of collateral damage. It knocked out major global platforms that rely on Cloudflare, ChatGPT, Spotify, Zoom.
But the real kicker was,
The real irony was that the failure chain was so complex that it actually managed to knock out AWS as well. It created this circular, self-reinforcing outage.
wow. The lesson for anyone listening is painfully clear. Power in the online world is just dangerously concentrated.
Yeah.
If you're building a product and relying entirely on one centralized giant for everything, that is a critical vulnerability.
The internet has become centralized, and its resilience is surprisingly low. Organizations have to invest in robust, decentralized solutions to avoid these single points of failure.
And if we connect this concentration back to the AI boom, we start to see the massive strain we're putting on the physical world.
The AI boom is fueling a global rush for massive computing infrastructure. It demands unprecedented amounts of power and physical space.
On one hand, this is an immense economic success story. I mean, in the U.S. alone, over 90 new chip fab projects were announced by August 2024. Tech giants are investing nearly $450 billion across 28 states.
These are massive initiatives. We're talking about OpenAI's plan for a $100 billion supercluster in Texas, which is just part of a $500 billion expansion over the next few years.
The commitment is historic. It shows the incredible hunger for high-performance computing, NVIDIA GPUs, custom ASICs, all of it.
However, here's the systemic constraint that 2025 made starkly clear. The physical U.S. energy infrastructure is lagging demand dramatically.
And why is that the critical barrier, even with all the chips being made domestically?
Because the energy grid requires these incredibly long build times for new power plants. You have complex, often multi-year permitting processes for power lines, and there are significant supply chain issues for critical components, like large transformers.
And data centers, especially for AI training, they are just power hogs.
They require constant, massive, reliable power. This energy deficit is now the single biggest barrier to AI growth. Several large-scale AI cluster projects have already been publicly throttled or just delayed because the local utilities simply cannot guarantee the hundreds of megawatts required.
And this compute arms race has a sharp geopolitical edge too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The U.S.-China chip war escalated significantly. The U.S. tightened export controls on the advanced semiconductor technology, specifically the equipment you need to manufacture the cutting-edge chips.
Which prompted immediate countermeasures from China.
And huge domestic investment into their own semiconductor self-sufficiency. And for anyone listening who isn't deep in geopolitics, this matters because every single tightening of export controls dramatically increases component costs and delivery risk for everyone globally. It impacts everything from servers to your phone.
Technology is now the primary axis of global power struggle.
And control over fabrication and compute is paramount.
Wow. Okay, so beyond the hardware, the sheer volume of data needed for these models is creating a whole new set of, well, frankly, bizarre technical failure modes.
This brings us to the fascinating and slightly terrifying risk of model collapse.
Okay, break that down. How does model collapse work? And why is it suddenly a huge concern in 2025?
It stems from the now common practice of using one AI model to generate vast amounts of synthetic data text, images, code, and then using that synthetic data to train the next generation of AI models.
So we're feeding AI with data created by other AI.
Exactly. And the studies are showing that when models are trained predominantly on this AI-generated data, their outputs become less diverse, less creative. They start to drift away from reflecting genuine, real-world information.
So the models are basically consuming their own synthetic tales, losing the richness and originality of the initial human-generated data. It's like inbreeding for intelligence.
That's a great way to put it. You'd sacrifice diversity for volume. And we see a related thing happening in generative image models, which researchers have dubbed model autophagy disorder, or MAD.
Autophagy. That means self-eating.
Precisely. This reliance on synthetic data leads to a tangible, measurable decline in the quality of the images over generations. So for designers and engineers, you need to recognize that training data is not an infinite, self-replenishing resource. Quality and diversity are essential to prevent the AI from cannibalizing its own intelligence until it just becomes a predictable, lower-quality echo of its former self.
We've talked about these huge systemic failures and the really deep technical triumphs, but now let's look at what the everyday consumer actually experienced. Because 2025 was the year the hype met the harsh reality of people's wallets. And frankly, a lot of highly anticipated consumer products just completely belly-flopped.
And the most visible failure in that hardware space had to be the wearable AI category. The Humane AI pin, which launched back in 2024, was really the poster child for this segment.
It was a beautiful piece of design, wasn't it? I mean, the idea of replacing your phone with this little pin.
Stunning design. But it faced immediate crushing criticism and just a severe lack of consumer enthusiasm.
It was an incredible engineering challenge. You clip it on your clothes, use voice commands, a laser display on your hand instead of a screen. But the execution, based on all the reports, just wasn't there.
Right.
What were the specific complaints that torpedoed it?
The critics and the early adopters, they all pointed to a few deal breakers. Inconsistent AI responses, really slow processing speeds, especially if you were trying to do real-time translation, and just a very limited set of functions compared to a modern smartphone.
So it failed the basic utility test.
Fundamentally, the novelty of the laser display and the whole phone-free idea, it just wasn't enough to overcome the friction of using an inconsistent device. It proves that novelty does not guarantee utility, especially when the device costs hundreds of dollars.
And it wasn't the only hardware failure. There were other rumored contenders, like the so-called Trump Mobile T1 phone, which just never materialized. It vanished behind a curtain of radio silence, even though they took pre-orders.
And that highlights a crucial lesson for business leaders. Consumer trust is incredibly fragile. Pushing unfinished hardware or even vaporware into a hyped market without a clear, demonstrable value proposition. It's a formula for disaster. You get reputation damage that is so hard to recover from.
But the consumer backlash wasn't just for startups. Sometimes even successful polished products can be seen as a failure if the value proposition is completely off.
Right.
And our sources highlight the iPhone 16 as the second biggest tech flop of 2025 by vote share. And it wasn't because it was a bad phone.
No, technologically it was advanced. It was judged as a flop because Apple, and I quote, missed the mark by some distance with pricing. It led to this devastatingly disappointing lack of perceived value.
Consumers saw these incremental hardware improvements, a better camera here, a slightly faster chip there, but the price hike was just disproportionately high.
And it really illustrates that in a mature product category like smartphones, even the best hardware is vulnerable to market rejection if the pricing doesn't match the perceived utility. Consumers are very selective now. If the sticker shock is too big for small improvements, they'll just hold back and wait for the next big upgrade cycle.
And that flops list was long this year. Garmin's disastrous move to a mandatory subscription for basic GPS updates.
A huge misstep. And Dyson's V16 piston animal vacuum, which offered minimal performance gains over its predecessor at a much higher price.
But there were some unexpected successes in hardware, particularly when the focus shifted from a single novelty device to a robust platform that encouraged broad adoption.
And that brings us to mixed reality.
Apple's launch of the Vision Pro headset was obviously its major entry into the space. But the sources suggest the success of the entire mixed reality ecosystem actually hinges less on Apple's specific hardware and more on some foundational infrastructure updates.
Precisely. The unheralded hero here is the OpenXR 1.1 update, which came out back in April 2024. Before this, developing a mixed reality app was just a nightmare of fragmentation. You had to write custom code for every single headset, MetaQuest, Valve Index, and soon the Apple Vision Pro.
So what did OpenXR 1.1 standardize that made such a difference?
It standardized key interaction methods, things like hand tracking, eye tracking, controller inputs across all these diverse VR platforms. And this is critical because it means a single metaverse application can now adjust smoothly, whether you're using inside-out tracking on a Vision Pro or external sensors on a PC headset.
It fundamentally solves the fragmentation problem.
It makes the whole metaverse concept practical and scalable for developers. Without that cross-device standardization, no ecosystem can scale.
Now, that standardization allows platforms to consolidate. We saw the consequence of that with Meta pausing all third-party Horizon OS headsets.
Right, so those anticipated headsets from partners like Asus and Lenovo, they're not happening anymore. Meta realized they needed tighter control over the hardware experience to compete.
The lesson is pretty clear. In hardware, the platform that standardizes the user experience and offers the lowest friction for development is the one that wins.
And meanwhile, on the industrial front, robotics matured significantly. But again, the key distinction was the deployment philosophy.
That's the augmentation lesson.
Exactly. The successful robotic deployments focused entirely on augmenting human capabilities, not on pure sweeping replacement. We saw healthcare executives exploring robotic surgical assistants to triple a surgeon's efficiency.
Not by replacing the surgeon.
Not at all, but by providing extreme precision, tremor control, and 247 reliability on repetitive tasks.
And we saw the same thing in manufacturing, with leaders reevaluating their strategies for adaptive robots.
Yes, these are robots that can learn complex tasks and be retooled in just a few hours, often working right alongside humans in dynamic environments. Or construction firms piloting autonomous equipment for things like site leveling or hazardous material transport.
These are wins because they target precision, speed, and safety in tasks humans already do. They make workers better, safer, and more productive, not obsolete.
Exactly. The ability of robots to work 24/7 or handle hazardous tasks is incredibly valuable.
But what are the constraints still holding back widespread adoption, even with these successes?
Integration challenges are still paramount. Getting the robot to talk seamlessly to the company's ERP system, for instance. But critically, workforce concerns remain a major constraint. The most successful adoption happens when the technology enhances natural human strengths. When your strategy focuses on augmentation and upskilling, resistance is lower, and the value you capture is way higher than models driven purely by replacement.
Okay, now we get to the section of the year that felt genuinely futuristic and frankly overwhelmingly positive. This is the application of AI and synthetic biology to solve massive existential scientific challenges.
Especially in medicine and climate. This is where those specialized, efficient models and the neurosymbolic approaches we talked about earlier really shine.
And 2025 marked a watershed moment for AI-designed drugs. The first fully AI-generated antibody actually entered human trials.
This was ABSA's ABS 101. And this is enormous news because it validates the entire AI pipeline from identifying a target all the way to designing a candidate for generating viable drugs much faster than traditional methods.
Tell us about the specifics of ABS 101. What does it do?
It's an AI-designed biologic that targets a cytokine called TL1A, which is implicated in inflammatory bowel disease. It was entirely designed and optimized by generative AI, and the preclinical data showed it had two crucial features.
Okay.
First, an extremely high binding affinity for the target protein, which means it's highly effective, and second, critically, an extended half-life.
And that extended half-life means it can potentially be dosed quarterly, right? Which is a huge deal for patients compared to daily or weekly injections.
It dramatically improves compliance and convenience, and that efficiency in the design achieving low immunogenicity and a favorable dosing schedule, all through AI, it just fundamentally changes the discovery timeline.
So the industry is watching very closely.
Absolutely. The expectation of interim phase 1 trial data later this year could confirm that AI is a new, reliable source of first-in-class medicines. We could see discovery cycles shorten from a decade to maybe 3 to 5 years. It's a profound shift.
And complementing that, we saw AlphaFold 3 take AI structure prediction to a completely new level. It's not just about predicting how a single protein folds anymore, is it?
No, the step change was expanding its prediction capability beyond just proteins. It now includes nucleic acids, DNA and RNA, small molecules, and ions. It uses this sophisticated diffusion-based deep learning architecture.
And why is that so critical?
Because biological function doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It requires complex interactions, like a protein binding to a drug molecule.
So AlphaFold 3 can now accurately model those complex interactions, like how a drug will fit into a protein's receptor site.
Precisely. This significantly improves accuracy in things like protein ligand modeling. And this ability to model complex cellular interactions with high precision, it reduces our reliance on costly, slow physical experiments. You can simulate millions of options digitally before you ever step into a lab.
And this convergence of AI and biology also led to massive practical breakthroughs in sustainability and manufacturing. We're moving from theory to tangible solutions.
We're seeing deep tech solutions being embedded in the environment itself. I mean, look at construction. We saw the breakthrough of self-healing concrete.
This sounds like science fiction.
But it's not. It harnesses specific strains of bacteria, like Bacillus pseudofermis, to produce calcium carbonate, which is basically limestone. So when cracks form in the concrete, water seeps in, it activates the dormant bacteria, and they organically fill the crack.
That is incredible for infrastructure longevity. What kind of effectiveness are we talking about?
This natural process can fill cracks up to 0.46 millimeters wide. That's 4 times more effective than traditional methods that might use, say, encapsulated polymers. Its resilience built directly into the material. It could extend the lifespan of roads and bridges by decades.
And the winds extended into agriculture, too, addressing one of the biggest sources of pollution globally.
Absolutely. Microbial biofertilizers achieved really impressive results in global trials. They increased crop yields for staple foods by up to 30%.
How do they work?
This innovation uses naturally occurring microbes from around the plant root to enhance nitrogen fixation and nutrient uptake. They basically do the job of chemical NPK fertilizers, but sustainably. Widespread adoption could drastically cut agricultural runoff pollution and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the incredibly energy-intensive Haber-Bosch process.
And then my personal favorite, the arguably most delicious breakthrough, lab-grown coffee and T cells.
This is a massive supply chain disruption just waiting to happen, all driven by synthetic biology. Scientists successfully cultivated coffee and T cells in bioreactors, producing the exact same chemical compounds, caffeine, flavor profiles, antioxidants as you find in farmed crops.
And the environmental benefit is just staggering.
It's immediate and huge. It requires 95% less water, it eliminates the need for pesticides, and it operates year-round, indoors.
Which addresses the incredible environmental cost of these commodities. I think something like 250,000 acres of deforestation happens every year just for coffee farming.
So this creates a supply chain that's resilient to climate change and dramatically reduces land and water use. It's a win for sustainability and for market stability.
Now, the power of these technologies, especially gene editing, is so immense that 2025 also saw a rapid regulatory response trying to catch up.
As the technology matures, governance has to follow. We saw governments worldwide starting to tighten regulations on CRISPR and germline editing. This is largely driven by persistent public concerns over non-therapeutic uses, what people call designer babies, and unauthorized genetic experiments.
So there's this profound ethical tension. You have to balance necessary therapeutic applications, like using CRISPR to cure sickle cell disease, with restrictions on non-essential genetic modifications.
Exactly. And organizations like the WHO and the National Academies of Sciences, they're expected to mandate stricter oversight. They're focusing on transparency, informed consent, and long-term safety while maintaining prohibitions on modifications that veer into non-essential, heritable enhancement. The focus has to be on keeping human oversight central.
And finally, we saw some clear wins in the foundational energy sector, TPV batteries.
Thermal photovoltaic batteries, yeah. They had a breakthrough, achieving 44% efficiency with these new air-bridged TPV cells. Thermal photovoltaics are basically devices that convert heat energy directly into electricity.
And that efficiency rating is a huge leap.
It is. It makes them a much more viable, scalable, and sustainable alternative to lithium-ion for large grid-scale energy storage in industrial settings.
A key step toward industrial decarbonization.
Coupled with that is the increasing practicality of EVs as mobile power plants. Bidirectional charging is turning electric vehicles into grid-supporting energy storage systems. You can use your car's massive battery to power your home during an outage or feed power back into the grid during peak demand.
So it transforms a consumer's car into a resilience asset for the entire grid.
Providing necessary distributed capacity, it's a very clever solution.
Shifting gears, let's confront the darker side of 2025. The ethical and security controversies that really started to undermine public trust in technology. When AI gets deployed in high-stakes areas, its existing biases stop being just technical flaws and become critical failures.
A prime and very sensitive example is the deployment of AI mental health screening tools that analyze your speech for signs of anxiety or depression. A study from the University of Colorado at Boulder found these tools just fail to perform consistently or accurately across different genders and races.
And you mentioned this isn't purely a data problem, it's more structural. Why is that happening?
It stems from these subtle systemic variations in speech that just mislead the algorithms. Specifically, a higher pitch in women's voices or common dialect differences between white and black speakers can lead the algorithm to flag distress when none is present, or, just as bad, miss clinical signs entirely.
So the AI is making biased assumptions based on non-clinical characteristics because the training data was too homogeneous.
Which is a clear ethical failure in deployment.
But on the flip side, AI is also being used to fight bias and misinformation. We saw tools like the University of Pennsylvania's media bias detector.
Which offers detailed insights into how news outlets frame stories, allowing you, the consumer, to read between the lines. And researchers at Oregon State introduced Fair-to-Dup, which is a cost-effective training method designed specifically to reduce system bias during the training phase.
How does that work?
It flags and balances data imbalances, making sure certain demographics aren't overrepresented or underrepresented in the final model. It just goes to show you that while AI introduces these severe bias risks, sophisticated AI tools are also essential for building the mitigation we need.
So if bias undermines trust in fairness, the rapid rise of synthetic identities is actively undermining trust in reality itself. Generative AI is now creating what are being called super-synthetic identities.
What stands out here is the level of criminal sophistication. These aren't simple phishing attempts. These are hyper-realistic fakes that blend stolen, genuine personal data with AI-generated biometrics, deep fake videos, and fabricated, consistent behavioral patterns.
So they're designed specifically to bypass the advanced verification systems in the financial sector.
The ones that rely on knowing a person's history and biometric profile, and they're using them to secure high-value assets, loans, mortgages, insurance claims on a massive scale. It's an escalating arms race between verification security and synthetic creativity.
And the risk isn't just in finance. Deepfakes are aggressively undermining trust in critical sectors like healthcare and politics.
In healthcare, you see deepfakes threatening patient trust by circulating false videos of doctors endorsing unproven treatments. This can lead patients to follow dangerous advice or just fall for fraudulent schemes. And beyond that, there's a critical operational risk like altering patient records or medical imaging data, which could lead to severe medical errors.
And in politics, the issue is volume and targeting, accelerated by how cheap it is to produce this stuff.
Exactly. The low cost just accelerates the output of synthetic content, what people are calling AI slop. It inundates news feeds and makes it incredibly difficult for citizens to tell what's real. AI is being used to generate hyper-targeted political messages, deepfake audio, misleading robocalls impersonating public figures right before an election. The speed and scale are the real threats.
But researchers are fighting back. A team at NYU introduced 8 visual tests, sort of like a CAPI-TCHA, to counteract real-time deepfakes.
And they found that specific human characteristics like rapid head movements or awkward lighting or things partially blocking the face acted as effective cues that current generative models really struggle to reproduce flawlessly in real time. Human evaluators were able to get an 89% accuracy score distinguishing real people from fakes using these cues.
It's a temporary defense, but a crucial one.
It gives verification systems a crucial, if short-lived, advantage.
Finally, this shift to remote and hybrid work fueled this massive and kind of unsettling expansion of the surveillance economy.
And this is a significant point about uneven regulation. Private companies face far fewer limitations on internal monitoring than law enforcement does under, say, the Fourth Amendment. This imbalance led major corporations, Walmart, Starbucks, Delta, Chevron, to deploy these powerful AI platforms like Aware.
And what are these systems doing exactly?
They analyze all employee communications across platforms like Slack, Teams, even public posts on Reddit. They use natural language processing and sentiment analysis to detect risks, like harassment or compliance violations, but also just to gauge employee sentiment and needs.
So proponents argue it helps manage risk and engagement.
But the downside is crystal clear. This technology now allows companies to constantly and deeply monitor their workers' internal conversations.
Which raises profound privacy concerns.
Absolutely. It reflects this growing imbalance where the digital workspace is treated less like a conversation space and more like an auditable data stream. And leaders really need to carefully consider the psychological and legal implications of this constant monitoring because it inevitably impacts morale and fundamental trust.
So after all of that, what does this volatile landscape of 2025 mean for the designers, the engineers, the leaders trying to navigate it? We established that the breakthroughs felt exponential, right? Moving at blistering speeds in specialized areas.
Like AlphaFold 3 in molecular modeling or alpha geometry in reasoning. But widespread, reliable adoption proved to be stubbornly linear.
Because the constraint wasn't the underlying intelligence. It was the integration capacity, the ethical oversight, and the physical infrastructure needed to handle the load.
And when you synthesize all the core lessons from 2025, a pretty clear path forward starts to emerge.
We have 3 key takeaways for you, the learner. First, prioritize resilience over novelty.
The biggest failure wasn't a bad app. It was systemic concentration in our infrastructure. The AWS and Cloudflare outages were catastrophic because of single points of failure. Organizations must invest in robust, decentralized solutions, exploring things like decentralized cloud computing or application-specific blockchains, so-called app chains, to make sure the failure of one node doesn't sink the entire enterprise.
Second takeaway, ethics precedes deployment.
Biased AI in health screening, worker surveillance, super synthetic identities, they all demonstrate that deploying powerful technology without thorough foresight immediately creates dangerous failure modes. And regulation is catching up fast. Brazil's draft AI bill, which draws heavily on the EU model, indicates that regulatory scrutiny around fairness and human oversight is a global, accelerating trend. You have to factor it into the design phase.
And finally, that critical augmentation lesson.
This is so important for engineers and business leaders deciding where to put their capital. The successful robotic and AI deployments consistently focused on augmenting human workers, enhancing surgical efficiency, adapting manufacturing processes, providing personalized development tracks. These approaches had way greater adoption success and sustained value than pure replacement models.
So technology should be designed to enhance natural human strengths. As we look ahead, this explosion of specialized AI models, chain of thought, alpha geometry, AlphaFold 3, it shows that the future of AI is highly granular. We are rapidly moving past the era of the one-size-fits-all large language model.
And if the future of AI is decentralized and specialized, we have to consider the ultimate form of specialization. We should think about the emergence of a personal large action model, a PLAM.
A PLAM. Okay, what is that?
This would be an AI trained not on the general internet, but specifically on your total digital footprint. Your social media, your biometrics, your texts, your emails, your calendar, your real-time location data. It knows not just what your data is, but the exact context of your life.
An AI that knows not just your data, but where you are, who you're with, and what you're doing at any given moment. It sounds like the ultimate personalized assistant.
It does. It could optimize your life to an extreme degree, but if that PLAM becomes the ultimate tool for utility and efficiency, it simultaneously becomes the ultimate security risk.
Because if a single compromised plan holds the keys to your financial identity, your personal history, and your real-time actions.
How do we even begin to secure the nervous system of that most intimate of AI agents? That is the foundational question of integration and trust that 2026 is going to have to answer.
A truly provocative thought to end on, connecting all those threads of integration failure and trust erosion from this past year. Thank you for guiding us through this deep dive into the volatile tech landscape of 2025.